Hi, everybody. It's Cameron Moore. I'm the program manager with Target Zero, and I really appreciate you guys being on the call tonight. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a charitable initiative helping open admission shelters productively decrease intake and achieve and maintain a 90% plus live outcome. So we do realize that there's always going to be some euthanasia in their shelters, especially medical cases that are beyond saving, even with unlimited resources, and also with large breed aggressive dogs that cannot be safely rehabilitated and pose a threat to public safety. But even with those factored in, we do feel that the 90% plus is achievable, and shelters are actually proving this all around the country. And the thing that makes Target Zero so unique is that we're able to offer our services to communities pro bono. It's absolutely free. There's no hidden fees or charges. But before joining Target Zero, I spent 6 years working as a program director for First Coast No More Homeless Pets, the largest high-volume spay-neuter clinic in the country, performing over 25,000 surgeries annually. First Coast's mission was to end the euthanasia of dogs and cats in the city shelter and surrounding areas. So while in this role, I was involved in many life-saving programs that directly impacted intake and live release at the shelter, helping the city of Jacksonville get to that 90% save rate, which they've maintained for the past 3 years. So while Target Zero was born out of the success story in Jacksonville, our pyramid of strategies encompass what's considered today to be proven best practices by all the major animal welfare organizations, and it's being put in practice by shelters and organizations around the country. And you can always learn more about us and about our programs at target-zero.org. So before we get started, I just wanted to share 2 announcements with you. The first one is that you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box that's located on the left side of your screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold the questions to the end, but feel free to type them in there as you think of them, and then at the end we'll try to cover as many as we can. The second thing is that there is a handout that can be downloaded using the green file widget at the bottom of your screen as well. And that just gives you a brief overview of the benefits of Return to Field and the Community Cat program in general. And I apologize in advance if I talk really fast. We're trying to get through this so we can get to your questions. So a lot of times people will use terminology that you may be familiar with, but they use them kind of interchangeably. So sometimes you may hear of TNR, trap, neuter, return, SNR, shelter, neuter, return, return to field, or community cat diversion. And I just kind of wanted to talk about the differences so that you know what we're talking about. So TNR is great. And it typically happens outside of the shelter system. So you have an individual, whether it's just a Good Samaritan or a community cat caregiver, who traps a cat, takes it to spay-neuter, and then releases it back to their outdoor home. And these cats are bypassing the shelter, and you know what? They're not at risk of euthanasia. So we love this program. We want it to happen in every community. It is already happening everywhere, and we think it's fantastic. But remember, Target Zero is focusing on ending euthanasia at the shelter. So when we talk about community cat diversion, we're talking about a plan for all healthy outdoor cats, whether they're friendly or feral, it doesn't matter to us. If they're living outside and they come into the shelter and we're not able to divert them to spay-neuter, just by convincing the public this is the right thing to do, if they come into the shelter, we want the same thing to happen to them as regular TNR cats in the field. So we want these outdoor cats to be fixed, vaccinated, ear-tipped to signify that they are sterilized and returned back to their outdoor home. A lot of times when we talk about this program, though, all around the country, it doesn't matter if we're in big cities or rural communities or northern climates or southern climates, we have the same issues, the same concerns, and I just want you to know that no matter where you're at in your community or how involved you are or if this program is happening, we understand these concerns, and I had the same ones when I started the program, so I hope that you will just listen with an open mind and just realize that we're not asking you to go out on a limb and try something that nobody's ever done before. We have proof that this works in all communities. And, of course, community cat diversion directly impacts the live outcome opportunity for cats that enter the shelter. Because remember, the biggest risk that cats have of euthanasia is at the shelter level. And it's not necessarily their fault or the shelter's fault, but it's something that we have to try to change the culture shift and try to retrain our public. So there's simultaneous goals of the Community Cat Diversion Program. We want to resolve citizen complaints. We know that trap and euthanize doesn't work, and that right now shelters will say, but our citizens hate these cats, or we have so many nuisance calls, or we have these issues. And sure, you're going to have these issues as long as we're not doing anything to productively solve the problem. So with Community Cat Diversion, we're going to actually solve the issues and fix the problems. We also are concerned about reuniting lost cats with their owners. But remember, return-to-owner rates across the country are super, super low for cats. It's usually less than 2%, and in a lot of shelters that we go into, it's actually 0.002%. I mean, it's the tiniest little fraction of cats that are lucky enough to get reunited with their owners. So we don't need to make these huge policies that affect the tiniest little fraction. We need to see how we can productively save the most. We also want to control the feline overpopulation problem. We know that they're reproducing exponentially out there, and doing nothing or trap and euthanize is not working. So we'll discuss that. And then, of course, we want to reduce the risk to wildlife and to people. We care about all these issues, and there's a lot of times when if you happen to say, I support community cats, you will immediately get attacked by people that say, all these horrible things about, cats are destroying the planet and they're causing all these issues. And what we have to say is, look, we do have a problem in all of our communities. And of course, everybody always says, in my community, it's different. We have this problem. Guess what? The problem is everywhere, but we have a solution. So we're going to go through all that. Let me click to the next slide. Now, the good news is that, like I told you, TNR and return-to-field programs are happening all around the country. And so we work really closely with Alley Cat Allies, who is a fabulous source of all kinds of information and resources. And we work especially with their legal department to help change ordinances that do allow for TNR in communities. And they track the number of communities that have made these changes. And, in fact, I spoke with Rebecca recently, and she was like, gosh, we really need to update this because I think it's more. But as of right now, about 600 communities have enacted a TNR policy or ordinance, and that's up tremendously from 2003 when there was only 23. And then, of course, there's thousands of communities across the country that are doing this, but they're doing it under the radar because they don't want to get in trouble because maybe their ordinances haven't changed, or maybe their animal control doesn't support this program, and people are going to get fined or cited and, penalized for being compassionate. So back in Jacksonville in 2002, we had over 34,000 animals coming into our shelter system and only 30% getting out alive. And for cats, the number was much lower. So First Coast No More Homeless Pets formed as a small nonprofit and said, what can we do to change this? We just don't think this is right, and we want to do something. And fast forward to about 2007 and 2008, they started fundraising and hosting TNR clinics, like once a month. We borrow a veterinarian's clinic on a Sunday, do about 45 cat surgeries. It was fantastic because we never had those options here in Jacksonville before. And then what would happen, though, sometimes is that some of these ear-tipped cats would end up in the shelter and they would get euthanized because back in 2007 and 2008, there was only 12% of the cats getting out alive. So we approached the interim director at the time at the shelter and said, hey, look, we've invested money into these cats. We know where they came from. You know exactly where you picked them up from or where the person says they picked them up when they brought them in. And we know that someone cares about them. They're feeding them. We've sterilized them, vaccinated them. Let us put these cats back. And we were so very lucky at the time because the person overseeing animal control was an engineer. He knew nothing about animals or animal welfare. And he said, explain to me about this TNR. And being an engineer and, an educated guy, he says, well, gosh, if it's good enough for these ear-tipped cats, why isn't it good enough for all the outside cats? And we jumped on that. We were like, you're right. All the outside cats should be sterilized because isn't that our goal, right? We want them all to be sterilized and vaccinated, and if they were ear-tipped, they'd get that get-out-of-jail-free pass. So we jumped at the chance to do this program, which at the time we called Feral Freedom, because you know why? We had no idea what else to call it. We just thought it was catchy and cute, but what we realized soon after was the majority of these cats coming through the program weren't feral at all. They were community cats. Some of them were super friendly because they had multiple people taking care of them. And it was really kind of interesting how that worked. So, again, we jumped at the chance. We said, yes, we will pick these cats up from the shelter. We will take them to our clinic. We will sterilize them, vaccinate, ear tip, and put them right back where they came from. And the city said, this is fine and good, and you can do it all day long, but we're not going to take the first complaint call. We don't want to be yelled at. We don't want to hear people's, gripes and issues. So guess what? We're going to give out Cameron's cell phone number to anybody who wants it, and they can call and yell at her. So, of course, I was so nervous. I mean, gosh, I listened to all these people who are opposed the program who said, you're doing a horrible thing. You're putting these cats out to their death. You're going to have, starving cats dropping dead like flies up and down the streets. And then everybody's going to hate you on top of that. So I was really, really nervous, and we worked with Best Friends Animal Society. They helped us initially with our funding, and they also walked us through it, and they told me, just like I'm telling you guys, it's okay. What you fear is going to happen is not going to happen, and you will be able to solve the problems. So the first year, we took in 5,400 cats that were outdoor community cats, and we sterilized them, vaccinated them, and put them back. Out of that 5,400 cats, you would have thought I would have had 5,400 angry phone calls and probably about that many dead cats, right, to scoop up. But the good news is that I had about a dozen calls the first year, and most of them were so easy. I thought, oh, my gosh, people just need common sense. We would have people call who were upset about the cats being on their porch. And the first thing is you always want to listen to everyone's complaints. Don't just, take in what they have to say and then try to figure it out. And so what I found was there were probably only about 10 of the same scenarios that I heard, over again, like in all the years and in all the communities we deal with. We hear like the same 10 things. And the first one is they're eating on my porch. Well, why did they choose your porch? Why are they on your porch? Oh, because my wife feeds them there, or because I put food out for my own cat who goes outside, or I feed my dogs outside and they're eating my dog's food. So sometimes you just have to walk people through it and say, okay, so if you put food out, you're going to be attracting these cats. Therefore, don't feed your cats outside. Or if you're going to feed your pets outside, put the food down, leave it 30 minutes, and then pick it up. There's going to be other times when it's just really, really silly. I mean, it's just family disputes. I'm mad at my sister, and she feeds these cats, so the way I'm going to get back at her is I'm going to get her in trouble and threaten to have all the cats removed. So some of these we acted like therapists and mediators, and it really had nothing to do about the cats. However, when we fixed the cats, majority of the calls in general disappeared. So that was amazing because, remember, everybody says, everybody hates the cats, and that's why they're complaining. Well, no. Most of the people that call about the cats call because we've trained them to call, and we've trained them to pick these cats up and come to the shelter. So the really cool thing is that we can retrain the public to do what we want now that we know about this different program. So in the next couple of slides, what I want to show you is that when you implement this program at the shelter, and remember, that's our focus, but again, we always want TNR to be happening in the community, you will see a decrease in the number of cats entering the shelter. Why is that? Because we're solving the problems. Because that cat that keeps having 2 and 3 litters a year no longer has those kittens because we've sterilized her. And for the man who called and told me that people were dropping tomcats off in his yard, and I mean, I was baffled by that. Who would, first of all, catch tomcats and transport them in their car? And why would they pick this guy's house? Like, is this some kind of cruel prank? But no, what I found out after talking to him is that he had a female cat that he let outside, and she was never sterilized. So guess what? Every time she went into heat, she was calling all the boys to the yard. And so they weren't being dropped off. They were just getting that mating call like, hey, boys, party's over here, at my house. Once we sterilized his cat, And we sterilized all the boy cats that he had caught. Guess what? The boys went home. The party was over. No more problem. The guy's happy. He's fine. So, again, a lot of times when you think, this isn't going to work in my town because everybody, blah, 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 hates cats or doesn't want all these cats around or whatever, when we sterilize the cats, it really does solve a lot of the problems. And so what you can see, fast forward to this past fiscal year, which just ended, look, the number of cats coming into the shelter decreased from about 12 to 13,000 to now just a little under 6,700. And then of that, only the tiniest fraction were euthanized, and the majority of those, honestly, were neonates or cats that just couldn't be saved for whatever reason. And you'll see Indianapolis, same thing. They had a lot of targeted high-volume spay-neuter going on, which was reducing their intake overall. But once they started their community cat program in August of 2013, live release jumped up, which is the bottom section. Euthanasia was cut down to hardly anything. You know, like the first year, it just was cut in half and then in half again. So it's making an impact, and we're actually solving the problems. So that the people who had been complaining, I've been bringing you cats for 30 years, no longer had cats to bring in. It was great. And really, the community does like these cats. They just don't know what to do when it gets out of hand. Waco, Texas is another example. They went from euthanizing 2,200 cats down to 122 cats the last fiscal year. The next one is Huntsville, Alabama. And through targeted spay-neuter, actually, that's what initially took their shelter intake from 10,000 down to 5,000. But you see what happens with these cats. In 2009, they were euthanizing 3,200, and so far this year, 35. It's huge. It makes a huge difference. And for anybody that says, well, I hate cats, I don't even like them, I don't want to hear about them, guess what? This program is something you really want to support because it will drastically reduce the number of cats in the community, and it will solve these problems so that you can free up time and money and staff and resources for dog programs, for things that you do want, for enrichment, for safety net, for preventing homelessness in the first place. So this program is great whether you love cats or you don't love cats. It's a win-win for everyone. So overall, our issue is we have so many cats entering the shelter and not enough live outcome. But remember, we've trained the public. If you find a cat outside, it must be lost, abandoned, or stray, and you better run it up to the shelter to save its life. Well, the funny thing is that a lot of people let their cats indoor-outdoor, and there's a lot of free-roaming cats that just live outdoors. That's their preference, or maybe they are feral and they were born outside and they're not socialized and they would be miserable inside. So these cats are doing just fine without us, surviving, having multiple people take care of them. We really need to just leave them alone other than sterilizing them. That's the one thing they can't do by themselves. And, of course, we would love all cats to be sterilized. We would love for all cats to be inside, but what's our reality? Our reality is that they're out there and they're reproducing like crazy, and we need to stop that. And we know that trap and euthanize doesn't work because that's what we've tried for the past 30, 40 years, and our numbers always increase. They never go down through that program. But the other things that we know now, which is really great for any community that's thinking about these programs, is that we have studies now. Back then, we were just had these like ideas like, well, I think this would work, but I don't know. Well, now we have studies. We know that cats are 7 to 10 times more likely to find their way home from the streets or be adopted from the street than they are from the shelter. So for everybody worried about that lost cat finding its way home, guess what? It's not lost. It knows exactly where it's at. It's on its way to my house to eat breakfast for the third time. And here's, good Sam coming up saying, oh, my gosh, you're lost. You're sitting on my sidewalk. You have a collar on but no tag. I'm going to run you to the shelter to save your life. Well, if you would have just left the cat alone, the cat will go back home. It knows where it lives. And if you go to the shelter, remember, only 2% of cats are having their owners come in and find them there. So better thing to do is if they're not sterilized, we want to sterilize them, put them back, and just know that they're okay. And then in another study done, 35% of cats are acquired as strays off the street. And this happened to me even recently, I went to a friend's house, and she's like, yeah, this cat showed up, and he's neutered, and he was microchipped, and super nice cat, so I decided to bring him in and adopt him. Well, guess what? He had been one of my porch cats. She lives a mile away from me, and this cat I had been feeding, I thought he was kind of my cat. You know, I had him fixed, and I did microchip him, and he ended up over at her house. So that was kind of small world and funny. But cats do fine on their own. They really can take care of themselves. And when we talk about community cats, we just want to make sure it encompasses all free-roaming cats. So it's not just feral cats. And a lot of times when you say the word feral, boy, people's hair just stands up on the back of their neck. It just is like a trigger for them that just makes them see red. But really, community cats they're friendly or feral. They just live outside. And some of them may be indoor-outdoor, some may be owned, some may be loosely owned. When we did this program in Jacksonville and we'd return a cat, sometimes I would have like 5 people in the neighborhood say, oh, that's Buddy, and somebody else would say, no, that's Tommy. He eats at my house on Tuesdays. And somebody else would say, no, that's Chester. He comes over, and it's the same cat, people. Like everybody thought this was kind of their cat, you know, kind of. It's a community cat. But ironically, the cat he had it good. He had all these different homes that he could go to. So what we have to do is try to retrain the public that not to think of the cats that are outside necessarily as stray or abandoned. And remember, it can happen. Cats do get abandoned. But for the most part, these cats are being picked up on the same streets where they already live. So really, it's not beneficial to them to take them to the shelter. Because really, majority of cats that enter the shelters, unless you go to a progressive community, they're not making it out alive, so we're really not doing them any favors. But when we do this program, who qualifies is any cat that lives outside, you know, whether they're friendly or feral. We don't need to worry about their personality. We just need to worry about, are you big enough for surgery? Are you healthy? And then don't try to overcomplicate the process. Sometimes people, the difference, again, between TNR and community cat diversion is with TNR, you're the one doing the trapping. You know exactly where you picked up the cat. Therefore, you feel really comfortable taking him back there because you probably know who's feeding, and it's probably you. But with a community cat program, you're having to trust that the cat knows that as long as you get him back to his neighborhood, he knows exactly where to go. So with community cat diversion, or TNR, SNR, whatever you want to call it, we would like to retrain the public that instead of taking cats to the shelter, that they just go straight to spay-neuter, get them fixed, vaccinated, ear-tipped, and put them right back. However, if they do come into the shelter system, we want the same thing to happen to them. And in some communities that we talk to, they have a really active TNR program just by private individuals out in the community. But if that same outdoor cat comes into the shelter, he's a goner. They're going to euthanize him because they're going to say he's not adoptable. Well, gosh, the cat is fine, and if it's good enough for the outdoor cats that are being TNR'd, why isn't it good enough for an outdoor cat that enters the shelter system? So, again, our idea is to encourage people to take the cats to spay-neuter to avoid the shelter, and it does happen. We have been able to change the culture in a lot of communities. And then, of course, this can be implemented in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes you have the shelter that says, we'll allow you to do this program, but we can't be a part of the release, or we don't have spay-neuter capacity at our shelter. So maybe you partner with a local TNR group or a spay-neuter clinic like we did here in Jacksonville, and they provide the surgeries and the returns. In some shelters, they actually do the surgeries on site and have their animal control officers return the cats. So it really can be done in a lot of different ways. It just depends on what your resources are in your community, but don't stress about that in the beginning. The beginning, you just want to open up those lines of communication and just see how we can get this done. Like, don't worry if you don't have money and you don't have traps and you don't have a van and you don't have a building. Gosh, that was how Jacksonville was. When we accepted this program, we had nothing. So, and it worked out great. Now, but the good thing is that there are resources out there now, and there's people that can help you get organized. So when we do this program, too, of course, you're going to get a lot of the same things about why this won't work in your community, you know, and a big thing is, you know, we're concerned about rabies. Well, what's happening with the cats out there now? Pretty much they're reproducing like crazy. None of them are vaccinated. So with this program, we're providing them vaccinations, which is giving them some kind of protection, and it's increasing our community immunity. And then, of course, When we're sterilizing them, we're preventing those future litters from being born. So ultimately, we're going to be reducing the population. And with less cats, we have less risk to wildlife. We've got less risk of zoonotic transmission and parasite transmission. But again, everybody likes to blame the cats for everything. But I'll tell you, there's raccoons and possums and squirrels that have fleas and parasites too. And, you know, the thing is that we have to learn how to all get along. We're not going to be able to eradicate any one particular species, and there's really no reason for that. And then overall, the more cats we sterilize, we're going to decrease the number of community cats over time. And we know this to be true because anybody who has taken care of a group of cats before knows when you sterilize them, some will wander back to their homes. Some will ultimately die off through natural processes, and some will get adopted from the streets, and then you end up with a much smaller number of cats. And this is happening, it's repeatable everywhere. And then what happens at the shelter is that when you have a fewer number of cats coming into the shelter, because remember, every year through this program you're decreasing intake, you can eliminate the unnecessary euthanasia of cats in the shelter, because the ones that stay in the shelter are the ones that truly need it. They are the owner-surrendered indoor cats that you were not able to help the families keep their pets or place them outside of the shelter. So those cats have a better chance of getting adopted. We go into shelters that have started this program that you walk into their adoption lobby and they only have 3 cats, whereas 6 months prior they would have been bursting at the seams. Indianapolis is one that comes to mind. They had like 100 cats in their cattery when we first visited, and they would have 2 and 3 cats who didn't know each other sharing the same cage. I mean, it was a catastrophe. It was horrible. But they implemented the program, and when we went back, they had 3 cats, and one of them was a 20-year-old cat that had no teeth. But let me tell you, he was a great cat, and he was otherwise healthy, and he was spunky, and he was nice. But when would that cat have the opportunity to get adopted? He would never have that option because he'd get beat out by all the competition, all the younger, kittens and other cats, and people would just say, oh, the old geezer's going to be the first one to go. So it really is amazing for the cats that do need to come into the shelter, and it just reduces their competition. And then again, the cat complaint calls go way down because, again, out of sight, out of mind. When you don't have 10 tomcats fighting over your female in the front yard, you don't have anything to complain about because you don't even notice that they're out there. And then, like I said before, when you have such fewer number of cats coming through your shelter, you have more time and resources for your dogs. So if that's your focus, awesome. Just think about all the things you can do, the play groups and the enrichment and the walking dogs and the talking with people to see how you can help them keep their pets so they don't even have to come into the shelter system. Like in Indianapolis, for example, when they reduced that number of cats that were coming into their shelter, they were able to take this ginormous cat room and turn it into another dog room. So that's what they needed, and that was great. Okay, I just thought this was funny. Because isn't it the truth? Whenever you talk to someone who has feeding a number of cats, it always just started out with a couple, right? Good intentions. I wasn't even a cat person. This cat showed up. I put some food out. I felt really sorry for it. Then I didn't mind it being around. But then she invited some friends over, and then they had litters of kittens. And now it's getting a little crazy, and my neighbors are starting to complain about it. So this was very common amongst the people that I talked to as we were returning cats to the neighborhood. They were all like, oh, what do you mean? If we sterilize them, they won't make more? This is phenomenal. And I kind of have to laugh because it's like, why didn't you know that? But guess what? A lot of this is not in people's everyday thought process, right? They're not animal welfare people. They're not rescue people. They're just normal people living their normal lives, and they have compassion for animals. So if we can help these cats, when there's just 1 or 2 of them, we're going to prevent colonies from happening. So again, a lot of times when we talk about these programs, people say, oh, you're making all these colonies. We're not making colonies. We're preventing colonies because we're trying to stop them as the cats are coming in 1 and 2 at a time in the shelter. Because, again, most people don't bring in 25 cats at a time. They're bringing in 1 or 2, and if we sterilize them, we stop the process with them. And then, of course, you always have the same common concerns, okay? And I believe these as to be true, because what else did I know before I started this program? So the number one thing was outdoor cats are sickly, they're diseased, and they're malnourished. So before we started our program, we consulted with Dr. Levy at the University of Florida, and she said, this is what you should do for every cat that comes in. I want you to weigh them. I want you to give them a body score. I want you to track all this data. And during the time that I ran the program, over 25,000 cats had come through the program, and since it's now 26,000. But what we realized as fact was majority of these cats were really healthy, and they were actually sometimes healthier than pet cats that were coming through our clinic from the public. And there were really good weights. And so while we would see some minor injuries, fights happen, cat's tail may get caught in a fan blade or something like that, or eye issues, majority of the cats were doing really, really great. And it was actually less than 1% of the cats had to be euthanized because of some extreme medical condition. And it was funny because I had always heard that, outdoor cats live these short, pitiful lives, and then they just die like really, really young. Well, we were seeing cats with cancer. We were seeing cats with geriatric disease, and it's like, wait a minute, how did you survive this long? Because you're supposed to just, live 6 months and die. So I joke about it, but in all reality, this is what people find in all the communities that do it. The cats are really healthy. And if a cat does need to be humanely euthanized, then no one's going to put that cat back on the street. So for anybody thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to put this half-dead cat back out, no one is going to do that. And here in Jacksonville, what we did when we started the program is that we microchipped everybody, because, again, we thought if animal control was getting calls about all these dead cats that they were going to have to pick up, we needed to know, like, how long did it take for them to die after we spayed them, and where did they show up when they were scooping up their dead bodies. But guess what? It didn't happen. The first year we had 5,400 cats come through the program. I had one cat that was hit by a car in our downtown area, which if you've ever been to Jacksonville, we've got like 4 bridges that come into downtown, and it's kind of crazy, and it's not a good place. Like, for this cat made the wrong decision to go up this bridge. But in general, we didn't get the calls about the dead cats. And we did get calls about cats. People thought they were seeing ghosts when a cat would show back up at their doorstep, or, they had questions like, hey, my cat was lost, but he came back, but I think he got into a fight because his ear is cut. And so we'd explain about the ear tip, and people were like, oh, my gosh, that's amazing. I always wanted to get him neutered, but I just hadn't gotten around to it, or I didn't have transportation, or I thought it was so expensive. So the great thing about the microchips is that it really made us feel good that all the negative stuff that we thought was going to happen didn't happen. But what we did find it was a huge expense. It was costing us $30,000 to microchip these cats, and we didn't have a whole lot of excess money. And so we thought, gosh, with $30,000, we could spay and neuter a whole lot of cats. So we decided to stop the microchip program. And, in fact, I just talked to a girl that runs the Community Cat program in New York City, in Brooklyn, this week, and she says, yeah, we're microchipping all the cats too. And so far out of 653, they've had 4 microchip cats show back up. So really, guys, the cats are doing fine. And while it's great, it makes you feel good, it's interesting, it's neat information, if you don't have a whole lot of resources, I would put the money into spay-neuter and not so much about the microchips. But it is something to consider if you're starting a program and you have a lot of opposition. So the second thing that everybody always says is how it's not humane to abandon them to live on the streets. But remember, the cats are already living in their home. This is their territory, their home. They know where to have shelter. They know where to find food. And we're not taking them and dropping them off 50 miles away in a park and saying, good luck, I hope you make it out here. That is abandonment. We're actually just taking them right back to where they were living. The benefit, though, is now they're sterilized. They're not going to be fighting. They're not going to be mating. They're vaccinated, and they're ear-tipped. So if we ever catch them again, they get that get-out-of-jail-free pass. And so this is not abandonment at all. And then even if we don't know who the caretaker is, we don't have to know. The only reason we want to know is to make ourselves feel better. But honestly, the cats know. And when they're 10 pounds or 8 pounds and they're big and fat and fluffy and good body coat and, good body condition, just fix them and take them back. They know how to get along every day, and they're probably, better off than a lot. So, and again, we're not saying to put back any sickly, malnourished cats. I mean, granted, there are some cats that make it outside that shouldn't be outside, but let's work with our rescues and provide other options for those cats. But really, it's less than 1%, and we see the same thing in communities all around the country. What if they're someone's pet? Yeah, so guess what? Guess what normally happens? If their pet got out and went to a shelter, remember 98% of the time, they're never going to get them back. With this program, we're returning them right back to their neighborhood, and they're more likely to find their way home from the street than they are from the shelter. And when we've talked to people who have lost their pets and their pets ended up coming home with an ear tip, guess what? We had a guy write us a check on the spot. He was so grateful to have his cat back. And even though his cat had been neutered, we ear-tipped him, and he was like, you know what, if he ever gets out again, at least I know he's safe. Because in our community, an ear-tipped cat would not get taken to the shelter and would not be put down. So he was really happy. And again, when they know what the alternative is their cat is most likely going to get euthanized at the shelter. They're really okay with it. And this chart will show you, most cats do return home on their own because they're not lost. And I've been at shelter intakes before where Good Samaritans come in with a cat who's wearing a collar, who looks healthy and great, and they're like, oh, my gosh, I found this cat on my way into work, and it was just sitting nicely on the sidewalk, and I scooped it up and ran here as fast as I could. And we just want to, kind of shake them and say, please take it right back to that sidewalk because it lives 2 doors down, and that family will never think to come to the shelter. And then, of course, what about public outcry? Because everybody says, this isn't going to work in our town. So guess what? Here in Jacksonville, before we changed the ordinances, we got the green light to do this as a pilot program. We did it for 2 years, super successful. Then when we went to council to change the ordinances, they said, no, everybody's going to be so upset with this. And we had to say, by the way, we've been doing this for 2 years, and so far 9,000 cats have come through the program. How many complaints have you got? Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. That's phenomenal. Green light. And every community that we talk to, same concerns. Doesn't matter if it's the shelter leadership or the city or county manager or the council people or the mayor. They all think immediately, no one's going to like this. And then when we go through it rationally with them, they're like, okay, we'll try it. And then they see how hugely successful it is. So the key is education. And we have to come to the table with facts and not so much emotion. And that can be really hard because a lot of times people who are fighting to save these cats' lives are very emotional, and sometimes that is translated into crazy cat lady. So, and that is something I've been called. So I proudly will say that I am probably a crazy cat lady, even though I think I'm very sane. But remember, when we're dealing with leadership and in trying to enact these changes, we have to think logically and rationally and remind them why this is beneficial to their constituents, to their residents of their community, and why this makes the most sense. And ultimately will be cost savings in the long run because we're going to have less cats in the community. So what communities have found when they approve these programs is that all those people that are secretly feeding cats and secretly doing TNR will actually come forward. And maybe the people have been feeding but didn't know how to get them sterilized but never wanted to approach the shelter because they didn't want to get fined. Because how many times have you talked to an animal control officer who their job is, if you've been feeding them for 3 days, they're your responsibility, and I'm going to write you a citation for $500. So a lot of people, like this gentleman right here, he was like, I wasn't going to open my mouth until I heard that you promoted this program. And he goes, but I didn't want 20 and 30 cats to take care of, so I wanted to get these cats fixed in my little community here. And he did once he knew that he wasn't going to get penalized for it. So that's the real beauty. And then other communities will, when we ask them about their programs, they say, holy cow, people just come out of the woodworks, and they totally support the program, but they weren't going to say that up front because they didn't want to get in trouble. And so like San Jose, California, their thing was, why didn't we start this sooner? And then Indianapolis, remember, is one of our fellows, and we've worked with them. And then they rippled out and started helping one of their neighboring communities. And Franklin, Indiana, Johnson County, they just posted just like 2 weeks ago that They have had an 88.7% reduction in cat euthanasia since the inception of their TNR program. So they're like, hey, people, this works. And it does work. It's so funny because there's still people that say, that doesn't work. That's the silliest program ever. So these are like real-life situations where it is actually working. So real quick, how it works at a shelter, if we're going to do this, in theory, is if you can't divert the cat at intake and the cat does enter the shelter, we want to, day 2, sterilize it, vaccinate it, ear tip it so that everybody knows it's fixed. And day 3, you take it home. Easy peasy. Don't make it so complicated. So either residents are bringing the cats in, Good Samaritans. It's not always people who hate cats that bring this in. And I totally was reminded today of when I lived in Hawaii and I was young. I was in my 20s, and I had befriended a cat at the church in the area where I lived, and she had kittens, and I socialized the kittens, and Mom was still a little fractious, and I ended up finding homes for all the kittens. And when I was going to move back to the mainland, I didn't really know about cats that lived outside, and I didn't know about TNR, and I didn't want to leave this cat to starve to death without me. And so I made a decision to take her to the local Humane Society, not realizing that she was going to be euthanized on intake. And that's exactly what happened. And I cried and cried and cried because I didn't realize there was another solution. There are a lot of people like that. They think this is the right thing to do. They think because that's how we've trained them. So again, not everybody's bringing cats to the shelter because they hate them. And what our experience has been is as we've returned cats to the people in the community, a lot of them have cried with happiness because they felt guilty. They didn't necessarily want to take the cat to the shelter. They just didn't know what else to do, and they didn't realize that by sterilizing them, they could continue to take care of the cats without it being a nuisance to their neighbors. And then, of course, we would like to encourage animal control officers not to be trapping cats in the community unless they're taking them straight to spay-neuter, and to only be picking up cats in the field if they're sick, injured, or rabies suspect. And then, again, let's not complicate the system. If a cat comes into the shelter, was it an inside cat or an outside cat? If it was found outside and it's healthy and big enough for surgery, fix it and put it back. Because if it's not lost and it knows where to go, it will find its way home. If it's healthy and it's doing well, it already knows how to get around. And more than likely, if it doesn't know, if it doesn't have like an ideal home, it's probably going to get adopted from the street. Or if it's feral, that is its outside home, and just leave it alone. Try to keep going really quick so we can make it to the end. But if a cat does come into the shelter, all we need to do is, if the animal control officer brings it in, where did you pick it up? They know exactly where they picked the cat up from. If it's a Good Samaritan coming in from the public, again, they know where they picked up the cat. It was right behind my business. It was in my backyard. No, I stopped at the grocery store, and the grocery store is on Main Street. Here it is. And we want to take the cats right back to where they came from. And then, and for anybody, too, you're always welcome to call me after the presentation or email me, and we can talk about specifics in your community. But, again, we like the 1, 2, 3 day process. It's all going to depend on what availability you have for surgery capacity, who's going to be doing the surgeries. But ideally, if they come in, they can stay in a humane trap, get sterilized the next day, and then get returned. And the reason we say to keep them in the humane trap, unless they're going to stay an extended time, maybe they come in on a Friday and surgery isn't until Monday, in which case we would set them up in a stainless steel cage with a feral den, so it's safe handling for the cat and for the staff who's taking care of them. But remember, we want to minimize the stress for these cats that are coming into the shelter and not put anybody at risk. And then, of course, the best procedures for them while they are there is to get sterilized and vaccinated, at least with the rabies. We also provided the FVRCP. Even though they might not get another one in their life, we figure it's not going to hurt them. It could help them. We would treat for ear mites and fleas if necessary, always the left ear tip. In our situation, we did vaccinate kittens, even if they were underage. Now, we were not issuing rabies certificates, but again, the vaccine didn't hurt them, and who knows, this cat may never get picked up again. It may never get trapped. It may never get vaccinated, so at least we're providing some protection. And then we offered up free rabies updates for all ear-tipped cats. So if you were taking care of cats in your community and you were worried about not having booster shots, you could trap those cats and bring them in for a free rabies vaccination at any time, and we would provide you with the rabies certificate. And then, of course, while we had them under anesthesia, we would take care of any, minor wounds or issues that they had, and not to worry about, if a cat only had one eye when it came in, but it's 10 pounds and it's otherwise looking great, guess what? It's doing fine as a one-eyed cat, so we're not going to worry about putting it back out. If we had cats that would come in that were declawed, or maybe they had like hyperthyroid issues, those would be ones that we would seek assistance from our rescue partners to try to help, so we would not be putting those cats back out on the street. A lot of times, too, people will ask, well, what about should we hold the females longer so that they can recover faster? Remember, with these outdoor cats, they're going to recover faster in their own environment than they are being stressed out in your shelter or in your spay-neuter clinic. So there's really no need to hold them, and they already live outside in the weather conditions that exist in your community. So if it is cold outside, that's okay. They were living in it yesterday. They're going to live in it tomorrow. The thing about high-volume spay-neuter now is that the incisions are so small. The veterinarians and the staff are very conscientious about not shaving too much fur off. And, when we talk to people that live in cold climates, because here I am in Florida, if it gets to be 60 degrees, we're bundling up. But in our cold weather communities that we work with, they're like, sure, we're not going to put a cat out in a blizzard, but we're also not going to be trapping them either. But if it's 40 outside or it's 30 and it's snowed, guess what? They live in the snow. And they do provide shelters for cats to help the community help these cats. And then, of course, we would feed the cats at the shelter or the clinic, either one where they were, before we released them. That way, if they did take some time to find their way back home, they weren't doing it on an empty stomach. And, of course, we'd always just release the cats the day after surgery so they had the anesthesia out of their system. One good thing that's really nice to do is to provide literature in the area where you're returning the cats, not necessarily just to say, ha, we brought this cat back that you guys didn't like, but it's to educate them, to say, what do I do if I have cats in my neighborhood? What do I do if cats are getting in my garbage? What do I do if I find baby kittens? What is an ear tip? Oh, that means I don't have to worry about this cat. It's already sterilized and vaccinated. So it's really good information. And then, of course, there's a number to call, and if they did have follow-up questions, they could reach someone who could walk them through the process. And there are times when people do have legitimate issues with cats, but maybe it stems from a neighbor down the street who truly needs some help, who started with the 2 or 3 cats and now has 40. So guess what? That problem will never be solved until we go and help that person. And that's where having your partners who can help you, maybe it's a TNR advocate, maybe it's someone at the spay-neuter clinic, that person deals with that person, the citizen on the street, to try to help get that situation under control. Because as long as those 2 are neighbors, there's always going to be cats there. So until we solve the problem, they're going to have issues. And then implementing a program in your community is all just going to depend on where you're at. Every community is different. So you want to look at your ordinances. Some ordinances are silent on cats, which is perfect, so there's no rules against it. Some, you do have leash laws for cats or licensing for cats, and what we would want to say is that community cats should be exempt from leash laws or running at large. Okay, now this is not a free-for-all for cats, for everybody to open the door and let their cats run wild. This is about rules in place. If you're a community cat, which means you have an ear tip, you do not have to abide by leash laws. But if I have my personal cat outside, I have to follow all the rules. And some people say, well, that's not very fair, but it is what it is. And people who have their pet cats are not going to be turning them loose on the street. We also want to remove the verbiage, stray, lost, and abandonment. This webinar will be available later, and we have another webinar out there about how to change public policy that you might be interested in looking up afterwards. And then, of course, we want to look at who are our partners in the community who can help us with this, because we're not suggesting that this is the responsibility of one organization, whether it's the shelter or the spay-neuter clinic or the TNR group or, whoever it is. Collaboration is key to making these things a success. And more grants are available by doing that. You can pool your resources so you can have the traps and you can figure out the surgery capacity and the transport. And it's always good to have someone who can talk to people about the cat situations. So you're not just talking to #1 cat hater who's like, I don't know, and those cats are stupid. That's not going to solve anything. So we want to have someone who can help people figure out what's the root of your problem and how can we solve it for you. And then if anybody here is not familiar with Million Cat Challenge, we definitely recommend you go to their website. They've got some great programs going on, all these initiatives to save cats, and it's open to a variety of different groups and anybody interested in helping cats in their community. In this graph, I just want to show you quickly, and then we're almost done. It just shows what happens when you do this program. So basically, the number of cats coming into the shelter is decreasing over time. The euthanasia, that middle line, it's plummeting. Cats are, there's no longer, cats that we have to euthanize except for a very small fraction. And then the cats that are coming into the shelter are getting out alive quickly. So, and this is, like I said, duplicated in every community that does the program. So I'm sorry I ran over a little bit, and we will go ahead and start with some questions.
Yes. Thanks, Cameron. That was really interesting. This is Lynn Fridley. I'm the Assistant Director of Education for Maddie's Fund, and we're going to jump right into the Q&A section. So, Cameron, here is the first question. What are your maximum recommended times spent away from home territory for either kittens or adults? For example, being treated for scabies or, heaven forbid, the female who gives birth in the shelter.
Well, let me tell you, we've experienced all of that, okay? And I don't think there is, while we like the 1, 2, 3 process, we know that it's not always perfect. And we have had cats that have given birth in the traps prior, like waiting for surgery. And those cats have ended up either going to a nursery or staying and raising the kittens until they could be weaned on their own. And then moms fixed and returned. And let me tell you, they have no issues whatsoever. I've personally returned these moms, and they will shoot out of the trap, run up onto their porch, and lay down like, holy cow, what an experience that was. So there's no worries about that. Same goes for those scabies cats. Again, they know what their home is. They know where everything is, and they're just so relieved to finally make it back when they do. So please don't worry about that at all. They're not going to forget.
Here's our next question. For a city council which is not in favor of a community cat diversion program or a citywide TNR, would it be helpful to do a pilot program to help prove that the policies will make a positive impact and then push for the ordinance changes?
Definitely. And that is the easiest way to get this to happen in your community. So ideally, you would want to talk to the individual council people, because remember, this is not their area of expertise. They know a lot about a lot of different things, but animal welfare isn't necessarily the top of their priority. So we want to educate them about why this makes the most sense for their community, and that handout will really help you with that. And doing the pilot program is great because it doesn't lock them into anything, and they have an easy out if it doesn't work. What we would recommend, though, is that they allow the pilot program for a year so that they can get the full impact of the success. And we have yet to find a community that has done this program that at the end of it says, wow, that was a complete bust. Let's go back to our old methods, because it just doesn't happen. The number of cat calls go down, the number of cats going into the shelter goes down, and everything is just a success. So definitely great on that.
The next question is it necessary for spay-neuter a certain percent of community cats annually in a community to reduce population? I may have read 70% or more about that outdoor cats need to be spayed and neutered for a number of years to achieve a significant and stable decrease in the number of cats.
So that is an excellent question. And here's the truth, okay? So there is a formula out there for you to determine how many outdoor cats in your community. And I'll tell you, we never like to really talk about this with council people and government leadership because it's overwhelming, because the number is huge. And when you compare that to the number of cats going into the shelter, we like to think of it as a pie. So the whole circle is all the cats in your community, and maybe the tiniest little sliver of the pie is going into the shelter. But of those cats are being euthanized. So if we fix the cats that are going into the shelter and put them back, we are making a difference with those cats and in those neighborhoods and areas where they're coming from. Now, Are we affecting the whole pie? No. Will we ever affect the whole pie? Probably not. But guess what? If we have hot spots, and typically these cats are coming in from the same general areas, that's why we have high intake areas, we're going to start fixing those cats, and it is going to spread through the community, and we're changing the culture of the community, and more people are going to go straight to spay-neuter to where we will get those areas under control. So I hope that helps you answer that question.
Great answer. Okay, are you returning singular kittens to an area where you haven't previously returned cats and kittens, and or there is no known caretaker?
Sure, and this is a hard one for a lot of people, and it was for me in the beginning. So what I didn't mention is I also do cat rescue, right? So I'm on the other side of pulling cats from shelters and kittens and finding them homes. So again, we don't necessarily want these kittens to be living on the street. We want them all to have families and sleeping on their pillows. But yes, we have to trust that even though I don't know who's feeding them, they know who's feeding them, and they didn't just like pop out of a bush on their own. And typically what we're finding, because when you return the cats to the street, you're passing out the literature. You know, often you're talking to the community, and people, and in our case, we were tracking every place that the cats were coming in from and where we were returning them. And so rarely did we ever go to a street like, gosh, we've never been to this street before, because what we found is that we were going to the same areas over and over because those same people were the ones bringing the cats into the shelter to begin with. So, but of course, if you have other options for cats, feel free. I mean, there are some that don't feel comfortable at all returning the young kittens, but especially if they're fractious or feral, there is no other outcome, and this is their outdoor home, and they really are fine and they're healthy, so go ahead and take them back. But, you know, if you have a rescue partner that wants to take that cute, sweet 8-week-old kitten, great, but honestly, they didn't make it that far in life on their own. They have people that are taking care of them. All right. Next.
So here's a good one, Cameron. What can one do when their municipal shelter gets money for each animal admitted? So it is an incentive for them to take a cat in, and I think they're referring to budget time for a municipal shelter, yes. And it's based on the number of animals that are brought in.
Yes, and that is something that we actually deal with whenever we do shelter assessments. So what we have to help these people understand, you know, everyone involved in the budgets and running the shelter is you're not actually making money on the animals that come in, because when you look at length of stay and how long you're holding them and caring for them and, you know, feeding and housing and medicating and ultimately euthanizing and disposing, you're actually not making a dime. So the best thing to do would be to reduce your cost by reducing the number of animals coming into your shelter, and then if you need to make up revenue, you do so in other ways, not off the backs of the animals. So this is something that we definitely talk to everyone involved at the shelter level and with the financial side of things, because people honestly think like, well, gosh, if I get $78 a cat and then I euthanize it after 3 days, I'm making money, but they're not, because they don't think about the cost of care. So that is something that we factor in, and ultimately, if you have, like, say, Jacksonville, they were taking in 13,000 cats. Now they're taking in 6,600. You don't think that's a cost savings? It is. It's huge. And then when you have a fewer number of animals coming into the shelter, they may be harder animals to save, and you will need the money savings to help get them out alive. So it all does balance out, but hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, here's the next question. Do you have any theories or research that relates to why less than 2% of cats have owners who care enough to claim them from the shelters?
Gosh, I'll be honest with you. I don't know. All I know is that that's what's been put out there, but honestly, when we go to the shelters that we deal with, now remember, Target Zero focuses on open admission shelters that are not doing well and that want to change. And I think we've only been to a couple who have actually met that 2% rule. Most of them are far less than that. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that so many people do let their cats in and out, and that if the cat doesn't come home at night, they're not really worried about it. And I'll be honest with you, here at my office where I work, we have community cats that are sterilized, and they like us, but they don't necessarily let us pet them, and sometimes we won't see them for a couple of days, but ultimately they come back. And, we don't really go to the shelter to look for them, and I just think that's just very common. People think, when was the last time I saw a tiger? I don't know. I'm sure he'll come back. And by the time, if they do make it down to the shelter, usually it's too late because so much time has elapsed and the cat has been euthanized, or they just never find the cat. So I don't know the answer to that one, really.
I have to agree with your assessment there. How do we find out if our community has the option, has this option for community cats?
Well, the best thing to do is to start a conversation with your shelter team. I'm not sure, like if you don't volunteer already, I would suggest volunteering with the shelter. Talk to the employees that work with there. Talk to the directors. Find out what's going on. You can always read your ordinances. Those are available online. And just keep in mind, the first time you bring up this conversation, you may get a really rude, we can't do that here. And that's okay, because remember, change is hard sometimes, and especially when people are like, this is the way we've done things for 20, 30 years, this will never work, our people don't like that. This is so common. We hear it everywhere. But again, try to have that open line of conversation, and maybe you can provide the facts in a non-crazy type of way, and get that conversation going, and then it can just move up the chain to the next level. And sometimes it's finding a city council person, or depending on what the structure is, finding someone who is animal friendly that is willing to listen, who will then take it to the rest of the group.
Thanks. We've hit the 1 hour mark here, and we're going to continue with the questions. We have several more interesting questions to go through. So please stay with us if you can, and we'll move on. Do you have a sample memorandum of understanding detailing what our TNR program will handle for us, for a town or a city? In New Jersey, we have to work with every small town. It cannot be done on the county level.
Sure. Well, I tell you what, Waco, Texas is a really great example, and someone that you may want to connect with, because within their animal shelter, they handle, I want to say some insane, 33 different municipalities bring animals to their shelter. So yes, and every little community had their own ordinances and their own rules and their own this and that. And so that was a community where they were able to pull them all together. And there's a lot of communities that do the same thing. But really, sometimes you still have to deal with each individual community one-on-one, trying to educate them. But there's not really a standard memo of understanding, but the program is the same everywhere. And I know, for example, in Greenville, South Carolina, that shelter handles county, city. It also handles the neighboring county, Spartanburg. And initially, they all weren't on the same page in the beginning. County accepted the program, started doing it, tried to convince the other two, and they were like, nope, we're holding out. And then finally, they were able to get through and pass it in both of those communities. So it can happen, and don't worry if you have to start with one or a couple, because ultimately we can kind of shame the rest of them into why do you not want to be progressive? But it's all done in a very nice way, and really when we talk to government officials, remember, we're not talking about let's save all the cute cats. We're talking about being fiscally responsible, saving money, doing the right thing, and using our resources for the purpose that animal control was created for, which is public safety.
Does Target Zero have a position on the age that kittens should be sterilized? By 5 months, at an early age, by weight only?
Sure. So when I started this program, our rule in Jacksonville, our rule was 2 pounds. If they were healthy and they were 2 pounds, they would get fixed and returned. But guess what? The current acceptable sterilization weight is now down to 1.5 pounds. So it depends. It depends if they're if they're in good shape. It depends, like if they're boys, a lot of times the vets will feel more comfortable doing that at 1.5 pounds, but maybe not so much the girls. But definitely it is very safe. These kittens wake up from anesthesia like nothing ever happened, and they just keep on trucking. So I would hate to put a fast and hard set rule on this, but again, we typically say 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds as long as they are healthy and we know exactly where they came from.
Thank you. When you say don't bring it into the shelter, fix and return, who is paying for that? The finder?
Well, again, that's where talking with who the stakeholders are in the community, it'll be different in every community, just depending on what the resources are. So in some communities, you may have a nonprofit that applies for a grant that will cover the cost of the surgeries. In some communities, we definitely try to convince the government to put aside some money for proactive measures to solve the problem so that you don't have to pay it on the back end when all these cats come into your shelter. So it is a little different in every community. And, of course, if you're lucky enough to have high-volume spay-neuter in your town, that makes it a lot better because a lot of times those organizations can apply for grants which keep the cost down really low. But we definitely always look at different ways of funding spay-neuter in towns. Sometimes it is that the community will pay, but again, not $100 a cat. That's unrealistic that anybody could do that. But through grants and through group discounts, just depends on again what your resources are. The best thing to do is to keep it as low as possible so that people will take advantage of it.
Thank you. Here's the next question. What is being done about the American Bird Association and Audubon Society's war on cats through trying to convince communities not to use TNR but kill?
Sure, and I've had actual meetings with the Audubon Society, and the one thing that we can say that we both agree on is we want less cats on the street. I mean, I'm a cat lover, but I don't want my streets to be overrun with cats. I don't want to constantly find kittens everywhere I go, and I don't want people, telling me all their horror stories about kittens getting run over in streets or, cats just out of control. I think we can both agree on both sides that less cats equals less risk to wildlife, and we know that through sterilization we can achieve that. And I don't think we can ever eradicate any species from the planet, and I think like Australia is a good example. They're trying to eradicate all cats. Good luck with that. I don't think we will ever see that in our lifetime, and in the meantime, if you do try to eradicate one, you cause problems with others. So, it's just I just don't think that's very feasible, and I think we have to appreciate everybody's opinions. I don't want birds slaughtered, but there's a lot of bird-on-bird action going on out there. There are other predators and not just cats. Cats, unfortunately, just take the blame. But I think if we can both work together towards reducing the number of cats, that's going to solve the problem. And especially if in your town there's a particular, sensitive wildlife area, maybe we do, definitely trap all the cats there, get them sterilized so that they're not making more. I know in Miami they had an issue where the bird lovers were furious because there were cats being fed in a park where these native birds were, and as the birds were migrating in, they were landing right where the cats were being fed on a regular basis. So it was kind of like the cats could just sit there and open their mouths and the birds would swoop right in their mouths. And it's kind of silly to think of it that way, but all it took was moving the feeding stations to the opposite side, away from where these birds were landing. And then, of course, all the cats were sterilized and the numbers dwindled to where, it really wasn't an issue anymore. So we do have to look at what the complaint is and find out what can we do to be good neighbors and to be the best cat advocates that we can.
So we're going to take one more question and then finish for the evening. Do you recommend trying to notify members of the community before trapping in their neighborhoods so that they can put their personally owned indoor-outdoor cats on the days that you're trapping?
Well, you could go either way. My recommendation would be if a cat is outside and it's not sterilized, it should be sterilized. So if you get someone's pet cat, it really needs to be fixed, and probably they're going to be happy that you took care of it for them because a lot of times we talk to people and they're like, I've been meaning to do that for 3 litters and she keeps getting pregnant. So, there are communities that do that, but also, if you are going to have your cat outside, it's kind of like a free-for-all. So it could go either way. Definitely putting the information out after you trap, I think, is great because then people understand, like, what is this ear tip? What happened to this cat? Or do I need to worry about trapping it again in the future? So education is really good to have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cameron. This has been very, very interesting.
Well, thank you guys so much, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. I know we may have not gotten to all of them, but you can always email me. I'm happy to talk to you anytime about cats. I want to encourage you to reach out to the people in your community, see how you guys can work together to start these programs or expand the programs that you already have, and collaboration is definitely the key to success. And thank you so much to Maddie's Fund for allowing us to have this webinar opportunity tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night.